Hi, it's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. Glad you're here with me again today. We're still reading in the story, The Mystery of the Black Hole Mine. This is from the D.J. Dillon series by Lee Roddy. We are on book 6 out of 10 books. So I hope you've been enjoying this. I know I have. So yesterday, DJ and Alfred got to ride in with their dads to Indian Springs. They wanted to file a claim on that mine if they could. They had a lot of other stuff they needed to do. When they were in talking to the man who had the gold shop, they learned that the gold nuggets that DJ had were worth really a lot of money, but they didn't sell them. And then they went to see the editor, DJ's boss, and they learned about an old miner who had disappeared. Well, maybe he died, who knows. And they called him Crazy Calhoun. He used to bring in a lot of gold into that gold shop. But nobody was really sure if his mine even existed. But after they heard the story by the editor, they got to borrow the book, you know. DJ and Alfred both agreed they had found the lost mine. The mine that nobody else had been able to. So we're going to go on chapter 6 now. Chased by Shadows. The boys hurried across town and began climbing the steep hill to the courthouse. It was the original, that means the very first one, 3-story brown brick building erected in 1850 and not very frequently modified. A white statue of Justice stood over the front entrance above the high concrete steps. At the building's center, a gold dome capped the highest point. This was above a fancy tiered section that looked like a decoration from a giant wedding cake, except there was no bride and groom, only the gilded ball. Alfred complained, "Everything in Indian Springs is either straight up or straight down, and we always have to go where it's straight up. Climbing these hills will keep you in shape for going back to the mine. Hey, look! Nell's truck is parked up ahead." Both boys glanced nervously around, but neither Nell's nor his father was in sight. "Let's peek inside the cab and see if that crossbow's there," DJ said. The boys carefully approached the black pickup. Being mountain boys, DJ and Alfred recognized it as a half-ton model with a 380 cubic inch engine. The original factory long bed pickup had been replaced with a flatbed and stake sides so it could hold stacked wood. The truck probably had overload springs because hardwood is very heavy. Tinsley Avest had failed to cut his front wheels against the curb to prevent possible runaway vehicle. He could get a traffic ticket for unsafe parking. "Can you see inside the truck yet?" Alfred asked as the boys neared the truck. "Another minute." "Oh, Mr. Abbas is coming out of the courthouse. Should we cross the street?" "No, that would look funny. Keep your head down and keep walking. Maybe he won't recognize us." Tinsley Abbas was a professional bear hunter who had originally come to Stony Ridge to take an outlaw bear on which there was a big bounty. Apparently, he also cut firewood for added income. Nell's father was a big man with heavy, unshaven jaws covered with black stubble. His face was flushed with anger, and he was muttering to himself. Both boys silently stepped aside and let the man pass down the street towards the truck. "Phew," Alfred said when the pickup door opened and slammed. "Glad he didn't recognize us. Wonder what he's so mad about." DJ shrugged. "Just so it's not us. Well, let's go into the record clerk's office and see who owns that land. Then we'll find out how to file a claim if that mine isn't already owned by someone else." They entered the ancient courthouse, which had a faintly unpleasant smell of an old building. The boys found the county's recorder and clerk's office on the second floor. Samuel Ging was a nice-looking man about the same age as Sam Dillon. He leaned across the counter. "What can I do for you, boys?" DJ asked, "How do you find out who owns a particular piece of land?" "Depends on where it is. In town or some of the unincorporated areas. We've got the records. But if it's public land like BLM or USDA Forest Service, sometimes called USFS, then you'll have to go see them." "BLM?" DJ asked. "Bureau of Land Management and U.S. Forest Services. The latter's under the Department of Food and Agriculture. Public lands are administered through federal offices. The Forestry Service, is at the edge of town, but the BLM's in Sacramento. If you're talking about property out in these mountains, you're in the wrong department." DJ looked at Alfred. Both boys knew that Jawbone Bridge was public land. They thanked the recorder clerk and walked back into the echoing hallway. "We may as well check on the firewood story while we're here," DJ said. "I hate to take the time, but I better get it done." "Keep it short," Alfred urged. "We've got to find out if we can file on our land." The boys found the Department of Weights and Measures in the cramped corner of the third story. They introduced themselves to Cleophas Bushrod and explained Elmer Kirsten's idea for a firewood rip-off story. Mr. Bushrod was a thin man with black horn-rimmed glasses. He was totally bald on the front half of his head, except for a small brown patch right in the middle of his scalp. "Glad to get a little publicity on that score, boys," he said. He walked to the corner of the counter and tipped up the hinged end. "In fact, right now I'm glad to see a friendly face. A few minutes ago, I was royally chewed out by an irate woodcutter." Mr. Bushrod motioned the boys through the counter's opening. They followed him to a desk that had probably been from the army surplus. They sat down as their host lowered his thin body into the armchair behind the desk. DJ began, "I never thought about it before Mr. Kirsten suggested the story, but in a country like this, when almost everybody burns wood for heating, I guess firewood rip-offs are a big problem." "Sure are." "There goes a log truck. Whoa, that one has big logs on it." "Sure are," Mr. Bushrod began. He pushed his glasses up to the top of his bald plate, so that'd be kind of like this. "Each household burns from 1 to 6 cords of wood per winter. Figure about 3 cords on average. This is usually bought from an itinerant firewood seller. We don't require a license except to sell inside the city limits. Most of these woodcutters are honest, but some are not. Most don't follow state law, especially about failing to give a receipt. The seller can be prosecuted for not offering one. You'd be amazed how many people buy firewood without any idea of the seller's name or address. Yet they want our office to prosecute the seller for fraudulent acts. DJ began taking notes on a sheet of paper Mr. Kirsten had taught the boy to always have handy. But, Mr. Bushrod continued, not all angry people are victims. As I mentioned, I just had a very angry woodcutter in here bawling me out. DJ and Alfred exchanged glances. Tinsley Abbas? DJ asked aloud, looking at the man across the desk. You know him? A hard case. I've had so many complaints about him. Some went to the district attorney for prosecution. DJ frowned. What'd he do? A better question might be, what didn't he do? He's been cutting wood up on the Jawbone Ridge. Jawbone Ridge? The boys both exclaimed together. Yes, but he had permission, so that's not the issue. I've had complaints about him delivering short loads, but charging for a full cord, failing to give a receipt as required by law, that sort of thing. Then he got mad at me when I tried to explain what the law requires. DJ hadn't been interested in the firewood assignment, but knowing Nails and his father had been on Jawbone Ridge made a big difference. DJ leaned forward and listened carefully until Mr. Bushrod finished explaining everything. I'll tell all the readers in a story, DJ assured him, glancing at his notes. I mean about inspecting the load for size, soundness, dryness before the buyer allows the wood to be offloaded from his truck. Don't forget to make sure it's a full cord, DJ. Remember, the only legal way to sell wood is in cords, or portions of a cord. And a cord is 128 cubic feet, well stowed and packed. That's what the law requires. DJ stood up. Well, guess that's enough for now. I'll type this up and bring it to you to check before it's printed. The boys went down the courthouse steps together. Alfred mused. Taking what Mr. Bushrod said about everyone in the county buying from 1 to 6 cords of wood a winter and paying between $100 and $150 a cord, that's a lot of money. Sure is, DJ replied, but I'm more interested in learning who owns the land where we found, and what the requirements are to file. Are we headed to the Forestry Service? Library's on the way. Let's take a minute and check out the books, any books we can find on the history of gold mining in this area. DJ took a shortcut behind the long, narrow brick building with iron shutters. Iron shutters? Excuse me, I got something in my eye. Oh, that's better. That had stood since the gold rush of 1849. The boys approached the library, which meant it was much newer. It had been built around the time of World War I. The friends climbed the few steep concrete steps and entered the building. They removed their coats and caps, left them on the chairs by a table before going into the stacks. The library was too hot, but apparently the staff kept it that way for the many older people who sat at different tables and read or talked quietly. DJ whispered, "Here's the section. You look through that shelf, and I'll take the bottom one." Alfred nodded and sat down on a small metal footstool with wheels. DJ sat on the floor beside him and began pulling books off the shelf. "Not much here," he whispered after a while. "Just stuff about all the mines everybody knows about. Maybe the only book we're going to have is this one that the newspaper editor loaned us. But let's take all we can. Might find something interesting in one of them." The boys finally pulled out the maximum number of books that they check out on his library card. As they headed down the narrow aisle between the high stacks to check out, DJ heard a man's voice through the stack right behind him. "You work here, miss? Where'd I find the section on local gold mines?" DJ grabbed Alfred's sleeve so quickly he knocked a book out of his friend's hand. "Hey," Alfred whispered in surprise. "What'd you do that for?" He bent to pick up the book. DJ quickly drew Alfred a few steps down the nearest side aisle in the stacks. DJ whispered, "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" "That voice in the next aisle. Recognize it?" "I wasn't listening. Why?" "It's him," DJ hissed. "The voice we heard threatening us in the woods. The one who fired the bolt. I thought Tinsley Abbas did that. Maybe, or maybe somebody else. We don't know for sure. I don't remember any of their voices that well, but I'm sure who's ever over that stack of books is the same one who yelled at us. We've got to get a look at him." The boys circled the stacks and tried to relocate the man, but they didn't see anyone except the usual elderly men and women. DJ had an idea. "Let's check out these books and wait outside. He should be easy to recognize because his voice says he's much younger than anyone else here." As the boys hurried to the checkout desk, Alfred whispered, "You think he followed us here?" "I don't know, but we've got to get a good look at him. I don't like being chased by shadows." Alfred handed over his library card at the desk, and the librarian stamped it. But DJ was nervous, anxiously watching to see if the unknown man came out of the stacks before he checked out his book. The man could recognize them, but the boys didn't know anything about him except the sound of his voice. In his hurry, DJ pulled the library card out of his pocket too fast. The smaller nugget came with it. The gold landed heavily at the boy's feet. He instantly bent and scooped it up. DJ glanced around as he straightened quickly the nugget safely in his hand. Nobody had even looked up from reading, but Alfred cleared his throat warningly and jerked his head toward the stacks. DJ's eyes shot there. Through a hole between the books, the boys saw only a man's eyes. Alfred whispered, "He saw it before you picked it up. You sure?" "I'm sure." "Did you get a good look at him?" "No." The librarian stamped DJ's card and returned it to him. The boy grabbed it and his books. "Come on," he whispered. "Let's get out of here." They tried to appear casual as they retrieved their coats and caps to walk out the door. Outside, they hurried down the high concrete steps and ran to the corner. They raced across the street and stood facing the old library with its high windows. "DJ, I'm scared," Alfred said. He shivered in the crisp November air. "Why don't we get out of here before something terrible happens to us? He can't hurt us here in town. Besides, we've got to see what he looks like. The door's opening. Maybe that's him." And that's where we're going to end for now. Well, I think they stand a good chance of figuring out who that man is that threatened them. Well, I'll be reading to you tomorrow. It's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. I want to pray for you in your house, out of your house, in the day and the night. And whatever you do, keep dreaming. Keep a story in your heart. Bye-bye.